Welcome to BizNews Daybreak for Friday, the 27th of February, 2026. I'm Alec Hogg, and here's the context you need to win the day. Well, it's good to be back from Cape Town after a fascinating time sitting in the front row, as you'll hear later in the program, for the budget presentation, well, at least the lock-up press conference part of it, which to me is really one of the best. I got even luckier, though, by being invited to a breakfast which was attended or hosted by the Minister of Finance, two deputy ministers, and the Director General. And that is yesterday morning. I've got a little clip on that for you as well. But let's go into the news because it's really looking interesting after budget. The Rand holding firm. It's at 15.90 to the US dollar starting there today. Also helped along, I guess, by the gold price, which is solid at $5,200 an ounce. Overnight on Wall Street, bumpy. The Nasdaq lost just over 1%, S&P down by about half that. After an initial positive reaction to another incredible set of financials that was released earlier in the week, Nvidia lost 5.5%. While South Africans were sleeping, other stocks to lose were ASML. And both of those are in the semiconductor field. We've got a special today for you. It's an interview with Chip Wars author Chris Miller. Now, if you've been following this program, or indeed my work, over the last year, you'll know that I rave about this book. It's one of the best that I've read on business, and certainly insights into where we are in the world right now. And Chris Miller, anyway, coming up in the program. On the JSE yesterday, Sasol dropped 8.5%, while another recent trader favorite, Blue Label, gave up 4.5%. Big moves, but long-term holders of both stocks are still solidly in the black. Gains since the beginning of last year are 42% and 72% respectively. And you can get all of that, by the way. Go on to BizNews. You'll see that there is a link at the top which says Top SA Stocks, and you can look through the day at the performance of the shares. On the other side, good news, post-budget, Nedbank and Discovery were the big winners, both jumping 8% yesterday, while local Ricardo portfolio favorites HCI and Lewis were also amongst the leading JSE performers. They rose 5% and 4% respectively. Well, on to the overnight news now. And those of us who didn't take the obvious hint when super wealthy Oracle founder Larry Ellison's son, who runs Paramount, showed his determination to beat Netflix for Warner Brothers in this huge deal that is being dominating the M&A focus all around the world. Well, we kind of missed the point because Netflix shareholders were unimpressed with its company's pursuit, and they'd knocked the shares back by a full 1/3 since Netflix said it wanted to buy Warner Brothers. Well, last night, Netflix withdrew, and after the stock was up 2% in normal trading, the share price jumped 9% after hours. And, well, you may as well write in a few more percentage points into the days ahead as the impact of not going ahead with the Warner Brother deal works into the share price. The Warner bid leads this morning's overnight news from our partners in New York. Here's Bloomberg's Doug Krisner.
Netflix has dropped out of the fight to buy Warner Brothers Discovery. Now, Netflix did have the option to increase its takeover bid after Warner Brothers said that a revised offer from Paramount Skydance was superior to the deal Warner had already agreed to with Netflix. However, Netflix said the deal is no longer financially attractive at a price required to match the latest offer from Paramount. So, Netflix declined to match the bid. Now, this clears the way for Paramount Skydance to clinch its $111 billion deal for Warner Brothers Discovery. Here is Bloomberg's Lucas Shaw on what's next for Paramount.
We've seen this happen a few times already, and it hasn't really worked. AT&T bought Time Warner, then Time Warner, or what was Time Warner, merged with Discovery to create Warner Brothers Discovery. Now we're taking a third crack at it, right? Paramount Skydance is a result of the merger of CBS Viacom and then Paramount and Skydance. And so we keep having these legacy media companies get together with the hope that they will then have the scale to compete.
That is Bloomberg's Lucas Shaw. Anthropic says it cannot in good conscience accede to the Pentagon's demands to allow wider use of the company's AI technology. Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei says there has been virtually no progress on negotiations to prevent the Claude tool from being used for mass surveillance of Americans or in fully autonomous weapons. Here is Arshi Siddiqui, CEO of Bellwether Government Affairs.
Well, I think it's leadership on Anthropic's part in the sense that we're in uncharted waters. This technology is still developing, and had Anthropic not taken the stance, it would have been a race to the bottom, because this isn't just about Anthropic, this is about other companies as well, where they might be then forced to this race to the bottom, where everybody is trying to get this DoD work and not having any sort of guardrails.
Arshi Siddiqui from Bellwether Government Affairs. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton said in testimony she had no knowledge of Jeffrey Epstein's crimes. Clinton testified during the first of 2 days of closed-door depositions to a House committee. Here is Clinton speaking to reporters after her testimony.
I don't know how many times I had to say I did not know Jeffrey Epstein. I never went to his island. I never went to his homes. I never went to his offices. So it's on the record.
The U.S. and Iran wrapped up another round of indirect talks over Tehran's nuclear program. However, the session ended without a deal. Even so, Oman said there had been significant progress, and according to Oman's foreign minister, negotiations will resume at a technical level next week in Vienna. We got analysis from Mara Rudman. She is a practitioner senior fellow at the Miller Center of Public Affairs at the University of Virginia.
Reporting from today's round of conversations makes it seem that Iran is looking to make progress on these talks, is looking at different formulas that may allow President Trump to declare victory and yet still allow Iran to continue to function, both keeping the current regime in place, lifting sanctions, and having a very small, a very low level of enrichment going on with their nuclear activities.
That is Mara Rudman from the University of Virginia. After the bell, Dell Technologies issued an outlook for annual sales above estimates. It's a sign of continued strong demand for those machines central to building AI data centers. We got reaction from Mehdi Husseini at Susquehanna International Group.
The earning guide for fiscal year 26 is definitely better than expected. We were all expecting gross margin pressure. Now, they are raising their revenue guide for the fiscal year by 12%.
That is Mehdi Husseini from Susquehanna International Group. Shares in Dell up about 10% in late U.S. trading.
And this is a man from this windy little town called Yaku. Sorry, other way around. Yaku's from Hermanus. Yaku, we need to talk about your upgrade problem.
I don't have an upgrade problem.
2 Audis, an Opel, a Kia, and a Hyundai. It's 5 cars, Yaku. Denial.
I just love cars. And we buy cars that make it so much easier for you and convenient to sell your car. You want to try it?
Okay, just once. Turn off the cameras. I see how this is addictive. Take 2 of those. We buy cars. The easiest way to sell your car by far.
Well, I stayed over in Cape Town for an extra day to attend a brand South Africa Treasury post-budget breakfast yesterday morning. It was the place to be. The Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana, his 2 deputy ministers, David Masondo and Ashur Sarapin, and the Director General of Treasury, Dr. Duncan Peterson, were there. They shared the stage. They gave us the backstory and the front story, answering questions for a full hour. The whole team in one place, it really was the place to be. And our recording of the full event is on BizNews Radio. I'm going to share a clip with you that gives you an insight into the way that those who run the country are starting to understand economic realities better. And it starts off with a quip from the Finance Minister, Enoch Godongwana, about neoliberals.
Our critics are saying we're neoliberals, but they won't call China neoliberal or Vietnam neoliberal. Those countries have undergone massive structural reforms in order to achieve the growth levels they have today. You know, I was saying last night, I used to call people neoliberals myself. I used to say about Trevor, no ethno, no L, and neoliberals. I've since learned that people who call others neoliberals have got no responsibility at all. Because I used an example last night. I used to call these people and go into a meeting and talk to and attack them and take them. And I said I used to drink Heineken at the time. And I go home and take my Heineken and relax. I've got no responsibility. I said, hey, you are Shaila Manashna, which means I've dealt with the nationalist. That's my responsibility, no other responsibility. You've got no country which is under threat of what you can call debt default. When you sit in my position, when you look at the numbers, you say, oh, should I go allow myself to see an environment where we lose sovereignty by going cap in hand to the IMF? So we've got to make these structural reforms. Structural reforms are also an instrument of growth. We've had an environment where over a decade and a half, trying to fix an institution, ESCOM, not fix power to the grid. Those are two distinct things. And the structural reforms are trying to fix power to the grid and also fix ESCOM. I listened to somebody who said, no, we're only interested in not fixing the lights, we're strengthening reforms. No, we put 254 billion rand on ESCOM precisely because we wanted to fix the lights, but doing structural reforms at the same time.
Well, as I mentioned in the introduction, one of the best business books I've read in a long time is the best-selling Chip Wars, a masterclass in semiconductors, beautifully written by Tufts University professor Chris Miller. Semiconductors are the oil of the digital era. Without them, industry simply stops. And almost half of the semiconductors are produced by a single company, and it's based in Taiwan, which China wants back. Chris was interviewed last night by Carol Masser and Tim Stennebeck of Bloomberg Business Week. Here are some of the highlights.
You wrote this book close to 4 years ago. How different is the world of semiconductors and the world's reliance on semiconductors now than when you wrote the book?
Well, I think the key difference is just the scale of spending that we've got right now on building data centers and buying all of the chips that are required inside of them. Nvidia first and foremost, but not only, we've seen companies transformed by the data center build out. But in a lot of ways, not much has changed other than that. We're still sourcing our key semiconductors from Asia and above all from Taiwan. And so the industry is supercharged its size, growing faster than ever, but dealing with some of the same supply chain choke points that it had a decade ago.
What is the right industrial policy to reduce reliance on companies outside of the U.S.?
Well, it's a really hard problem because TSMC is such a capable and efficient manufacturer in their home base in Taiwan. But I think the U.S. government is right to say that we need a more diversified manufacturing base for the world's most important semiconductors. I think we've learned over the last couple of years there's no silver bullet. President Trump's tried tariffs. That comes with obvious downside. President Biden tried subsidies. That worked to a degree, but only to a degree. Here's the reality. The chip industry has involved hundreds of billions of dollars of capex over the last several decades. And so it's just not going to move fast. And so if you want to slowly change the structure of where chips are produced, you've got to plan for years of implementation of measures designed to shift the economics of the chip industry.
Chris, I am curious too. Who do you talk to? What research do you follow? What are the leading voices? What are the leading companies that you watch to figure out how the semiconductor space is evolving? I mean, we still know TSMC is still the big manufacturer of all chips in the world, and there's geopolitical tensions to that. But give us an idea of where do you think kind of investors and just the world at large need to be focusing their attention on when it comes to the semiconductor world? Is it Nvidia? Is it China? Is it something else?
Well, I think the hard problem is that it's all of the above, and we've seen this play out in the GPU supply chain over the past couple of years, where we've had shortages in different types of components, different materials, and the memory chips that go next to GPUs and AI servers each part of the supply chain has had to dramatically ramp up its production capacity to respond to this surge in demand. And so if you only look at one part of the supply chain, you miss the challenges that other parts are often facing. And so it's the chip designers, it's the chip makers, but it's also the materials suppliers, which are often not even thought of as being semiconductor firms, but produce many of the capabilities that are critical to actually manufacture the AI chips and servers that we need.
Good news from Southern Africa. BizNews partner DCC Hotel Group showcases world-class hospitality across the region. We spotlight more than 100 carefully selected lodges supporting tourism, local communities, and conservation. Here in Hermanus, whale watching and coastal charm await. Your home for the BizNews Conference 2026.
Next up, a fascinating segment from the FT News briefing. It reveals how Deutsche Bank eagerly rolled out the red carpet for convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. The bank ignored glaring compliance red flags for years just to secure his wealth and business. Let's take a listen.
We're going to take a dive into the financial world of the late convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. He parked hundreds of millions of dollars at Deutsche Bank after JP Morgan cut him loose in 2013. Internal documents recently released by the U.S. Department of Justice showed just how much the bank rolled out the red carpet for Epstein and ignored potential compliance issues. I'm joined now by the FT's Robert Smith, who's been looking into this. Hey, Rob.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Good to have you. So, Rob, how did Deutsche Bank roll out the red carpet for Epstein?
Deutsche Bank was wooing Jeffrey Epstein as a potential client in 2013. This was years after he was convicted for sexual offenses involving a minor. So, Jeffrey Epstein's crimes were not unknown. Deutsche Bank essentially poached one of his key bankers at JP Morgan and then in their telling won the client over. But what had really happened, perhaps, Deutsche was oblivious to this, was JP Morgan had actually cut Epstein off in the middle of 2013. They decided that the reputational risk, to use a sort of horrible euphemism that banks use, had grown too high. And who was there knocking at his door? Deutsche Bank.
Now, once Deutsche Bank took over Epstein's accounts, were there any compliance concerns that were raised?
There were a lot of compliance concerns that were raised. I think, rewinding to his onboarding, as banks call it, he's a convicted sex offender, so he was labeled a high-risk account. And usually, those sorts of people would need sign-off from something called the Reputational Risk Committee. They decided that wasn't necessary in this case, which seems a little odd. And then essentially through the life of Jeffrey Epstein's relationship with Deutsche, he had hundreds of millions of dollars at the bank. He was doing lots of trading. He was also doing lots of cash management. Compliance were regularly flagging things. They were flagging payments to women in Eastern Europe and Russia. They'd ask for explanations. They'd be told, oh, this is a friend and Jeffrey is covering their tuition. It's quite amazing that the account carried on in this fashion for as long as it did.
So what did the bank have to say about your reporting, Rob?
I think for Deutsche, they've responded to this publicly many times. They've been fined over this previously. I think Christian Saving, the CEO, sort of personally apologized over this. So, their response was essentially, look, we made a big error here. There are weaknesses in our controls. And they essentially say that they've since systematically tackled these weaknesses.
How did Epstein's relationship with Deutsche Bank ultimately end?
So, as I said, there were these compliance alerts throughout the life of Epstein's account at Deutsche. But I think the key moment is towards the end of 2018, the Miami Herald, they did a sort of groundbreaking, deep investigative report into Epstein, the extent of his alleged sex trafficking operation. And someone in Deutsche reads that, and I think they then really wake up. So this was a sort of senior risk manager. And on the back of that, she looks at some of the beneficiaries of the trusts that Deutsche banks, and she sees that their models, which have been sort of photographed by paparazzi going in and out of Epstein's mansion. And, she asked the very obvious question, like, what do these women do for Jeffrey Epstein? And it's this moment when they finally decide to debank Jeffrey Epstein.
Rob, you look at a lot of the world of finance. What does this story reveal about compliance and risky clients in the banking industry?
I think this story is a case study in everything going wrong, essentially. So banks are highly regulated. They have AML departments, that's anti-money laundering, and KYC departments, know your client departments. And I think it just shows that major banks, even if they're nominally investing a lot in compliance, they've got the right structures in place, if the bankers just really want to do business with this guy, they think this guy's important, he's opening lots of doors, compliance can get railroaded or just sort of ignored quite easily.
Bit of overlooked news for offshore investors from yesterday's budget is that the single discretionary allowance has been doubled to 2 million rand. And that means married couples can now take 4 million rand abroad every year. Really wipes out the bit of exchange control that 99.9% of the population are subjected to. That's as far as investing abroad is concerned. There's still a heck of a lot of exchange control when it comes to regulations and filling in forms and compliance. We know because we bring money into the country quite often, and well, it doesn't just arrive. Maybe one day. I'm still hoping. Anyway, to close out today's Daybreak, a bit of fun from the post-budget breakfast that I referred to a little earlier. Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana seemed quite taken aback by the 8 out of 10 rating that I gave this year's budget, so much so that he had to announce it in the breakfast in his introduction.
Alec Hogg normally sits in one place during the press briefings. One place, you won't miss it. It's right in the front row on our left. Now, he's said something that I need to celebrate for the whole year. He's given me 8 out of 10. So we have got to celebrate the whole year. I've never had such an accolade from him.
Quite a shout out. I think you'd agree. I don't know if I'm next time round, maybe you have to sit in a different place. Anyway, now you have the edge. For the full interviews and the details behind these stories, head over to biznews.com. I'm Alec Hogg. Thanks for starting your morning with us. We look forward to being back in your company on Monday. Just a week and a bit to go to the BizNews conference. There are still some tickets. So if you still want to come along, go for it. You go onto biznews.com and you'll see at the top of the page is an image. Click on it and you'll get all the details. But for today, go and seize it.